Thank you for downloading from Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. Support for this podcast comes from your generous gifts and donations. You can find out more about Ravi Zacharias and the team at www.rzim.org.
I remember some years ago when I just first started writing, I was at the booth of the Christian Booksellers Convention in Anaheim, and I was standing out in front, and the next publisher was just a few feet away, and I saw a man who looked rather emaciated. My wife was standing next to me, and I said, that looks like Jim Bakker to me, but rather weathered and worn out. And sure enough, it was him. And I don't say this to be unkind, because he himself has described it in his book. During his heyday, he and his wife would sit on golden chairs at the book convention, and the masses would come and stand and line up just to touch that hand, just to be in their presence. And then he fell in a bad way and ended up in prison. That night he spoke, and he told us this story. Thousands were listening. He said one day he was in his overalls cleaning the bathrooms, and with that mop and bucket and all sloshing around that bathroom floor, one of the guards came to him and said, "There's somebody here to see you." And he said, "I don't want to see anybody." He said, "No, I think you need to see this man." He said, "No, I don't want to see anybody." He said, "You better come." And he said, "Well, I'll come like this then. I'm not going to change." He said, "That's fine." And he comes out, and Bakker says he walks out into the visitors area, and who's standing there? Billy Graham. And as soon as Jim walked into the room, Billy put his arms out. Here's Bakker with his overalls, all that water sloshed all over him, and Billy just wrapped his arms around him. And Jim Bakker said, "I cried like a baby." He said, "Do you know what it feels like to be the most despised minister in the land, being embraced by the most admired minister in the land, who says to you, 'Jim, I love you'?" In Hinduism, you pay. Every birth is a rebirth. The karmic cycle goes on and on. In Buddhism, you pay. Even to a point where even your very ego does not survive each death. It's just the transmigration of karma, not even the you, because there is no you in Buddhism. You will have Muslims tell you this, that they will be judged on the judgment day, and their hope is that their good deeds will outweigh their bad deeds. I'm not misquoting them. That's exactly what they will tell you. I remember one man from Baghdad telling me that he counted his steps every time he went to the mosque so that he would keep a log of it as a good deed that he had done. To traverse this distance, he'd go to a farthest away mosque in order to accumulate the amount of good deeds. Every other worldview is works-oriented. In the Christian worldview, it is grace. You are forgiven, and the works do not earn your salvation, but they demonstrate it. And they come as a result of what it is that you have received from the gift of God. So next time you think it's cheap grace, take a look at the cross and ask yourself the question whether it really was cheap or the most costly thing you could ever imagine. So number one, his description of the human condition. Number two, his provision for my malady. Number three, it's his equipment in my suffering. Every human being at some stage will go through the dark night of the soul and the valleys. I've come to a stage in my life where I'm never surprised anymore by the heartaches of people, the loneliness of people, the struggle of people. We went through some of this even in our own family. And I remember my little girl, my daughter, saying one day, "I guess, Dad, it's called life. It's called life." When she was hurting at the most in her young life, she said, "I guess, Dad, it's called life." We all endure it. The whole philosophy of Buddhism was to find an answer to dukkha, to suffering. And that's why on the very night Gautama Buddha's son was being born, Rahul, he left his home in search of nirvana, because his answer was, You've got to be detached completely from any care or desire. That is the only way not to suffer. You have no values or no attachment, which I find rather intriguing. And I said in my book, I've written a series of books of great conversations. The first one was called The Lotus and the Cross. Jesus talks to Buddha. Second one, Sense and Sensuality. Jesus talks to Oscar Wilde. I think third was The Lamb and the Fuhrer. Jesus talks to Hitler. Fourth was New Birth, Rebirth. Jesus talks to Krishna. And so it goes. But I remember when I was doing the Lotus and the Cross on Buddhism, and I said to a Buddhist scholar in Thailand, I said to her, if detachment is what you seek, attachment to detachment, I said, can you tell me why the Dalai Lama is spending so much of his time for the liberation of Tibet? Is he choosing to be less than what he ought to be? Why does he care? He ought not to care. The quintessential man who represents your worldview is still attached by choice. She says, shall we just say, because he chooses to? I said, yeah, I guess that's what we'll have to say. Which means he's choosing to do wrong, to go in a path that he himself says you ought not to go. Jesus tells you and me to hunger and thirst after righteousness. Hungering is right. And what I find amazing is that as God takes you through these lonely and dark moments, I'll tell you what, you find you come out stronger, you come out better, you come out with an understanding of what heartache and pain is all about. I tell you, you will go through the dark night of the soul. I tell you, you will go through moments of great sadness and great loneliness. I remember losing both of my parents relatively early in life. I was only in my 20s when I lost my mom. And just 5 years after that, lost my dad. And it's a terrible feeling to come home after some triumphant set of meetings and not have a mom and dad to phone and tell them about it, because they were always your greatest fans and supporters in the process. Your joy was multiplied when you had the privilege of sharing something wonderful with them. It's a lonely feeling. The world never looks the same again. In my own life, I've suffered a lot with serious back problems. I've got 2 metal rods halfway up my back holding me up. And yet with this painful lifestyle of over 200 days on the road every year, crisscrossing the globe, some nights are pretty painful. Pretty painful. And you cast your care upon him, and you understand that he sharpens and fine-tunes you so that you will always remember when you pray, Our Father who art in heaven. You are not sovereign over the world, he is. In my book, The Grand Weaver, I shared this. I can tell you this, ladies and gentlemen, God is holding the threads of your life. Believe me, you will never know till you stand before him how beautiful a design he has planned for you. I came to know Christ on a bed of suicide. Nobody could have ever told me then the design he had planned for me. My dad looked me in the eye one day and said, you are such a loser. You will be such an embarrassment to the family all of our lives. And it drove me to the edge. In that book, Grand Weaver, I tell a story of how a sari is made in India. One of the most beautiful things you will ever see attire a bride. And it is made by 2 people, a father and a son generally. The father sits on the platform, the son at the bottom. The father's got all these spools of threads around him, beautiful colors, red, blues, gold, silver, magnificent colors, with semi-precious stones used in the dyes. And at the bottom of the 2 steps sits the son, and both of them in that lotus position. I told my wife when I looked at it, I said, I can get into that position, but I don't think I can get out of it. The man sitting at the top, the son sitting below. The son had a magnificent job. It is what you call constant monotony. The father would nod and the son goes the shuttle, right to left, left to right. And then he pulls the threads, the father, and nods, and the son goes right to left, left to right. I said to her, I can do that. I can do that. If somebody nods and tells me how to move right to left, left to right, I can do that. Doesn't take much skill. Actually, machines can do that. But you come back 3 or 4 days later and you see the magnificent pattern emerging. And you know, all along the design has been in the mind of the Father. He's been holding the threads and pulling it together. The grand weaver is holding the threads of your life. I do not know what you are going through now, but you submit your life to him, and I promise you he will surprise you and pull those threads together till you stand before him and say, only you could have brought such beauty out of such a chaotic life. His equipment in suffering. Fourthly and quickly, his engagement in history. No, we are not Marxists who are utopianists, pie in the sky, by and by when I die. Nor are we fiddler on the roof traditionalists, tradition. Nor are we grab the moment by the throat existentialists, now with a passion. As oft as you take of this bread and drink of this cup, now you proclaim the Lord's death in the past until he come in the future. In the eyes of Christ, all of history is important, past, present, and future. He is sovereign over all of time. So we're not merely utopianists, we're not merely traditionalists, we're not merely existentialists. In gathering the finger of each, we gather the fist of all of reality. God pulls it all together. Everything is important in time. Fifthly, his disclosure of reality, and this is key. You know, people often say to us, how does one defend the Trinity? Well, how does one defend life? You think we understand life? Yeah, a man and a woman come together, and the sperm and the egg get together, and 9 months later you've got a little life. Oh yeah, we've understood it, sure. We've understood it. As Francis Collins said, when you look at 3.1 billion bits of information, you find out how much there is really we don't know. And so what I want to say to you is this. Why is it, think with me now, why is it that you and I always lunge towards the relational? Lee Iacocca said in his book, Straight Talk, here I am in the twilight years of my life, still wondering what it's all about. This much I know, fame and fortune are for the birds. He said that. He said, but then I look at my children and I see them and I know I love them. And I say to myself, if you haven't loved your own family, what have you really accomplished in life? When you've been the head of an automotive empire, and when your name is a household name, and your bank account is multiplied millions of times, and you say, I look at my children and I say to myself, I love them. And if you haven't loved them, what have you really accomplished in life? You know what he's telling me? The longing in your heart and mind is for a relationship. And only in the Trinity do you see the reality of God, who is a being in relationship, and we are made after his own image. And until we are related to him and related to one another, we will never find the fulfillment in the isolated ego of the I. God has made us in his own image. You know, when you think of it for just a moment, a woman is impregnated. And at that given moment, there are really 3 DNAs in her body. Husband's, hers, the emergent child. And we think we understand it. If there is the possibility with each added dimension, from the first to the second to the third, ultimately from the finitude to infinitude, is it really that difficult for God to be one in one sense and 3 in another sense? Think of it in another way. Suppose God was not a Trinity. Suppose God is a monad, say, as in other concepts. Let me ask you this. Can you really say God is love? Who's he loving? Can you really say God spoke? Who's he speaking to? You end up with an entity who needs other entities in order to fulfill his own proclivities. And that's why the greatest search of philosophy has always been to find unity in diversity. How do you find unity in diversity? That's why, by the way, the Greeks came up with universities, to find unity in diversity. The only way you can find unity and diversity is in the community of the Trinity, where God is a being in relationship, and you and I hunger after relationships. That's why Augustine said, you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee. This concept of the Trinity is very unique in the Christian faith. Just two more thoughts I'll leave with you very quickly. The embodiment of the ideal in Jesus. So pure, so pure. I won't even go into comparisons of other founders of the faith. Their shenanigans, their sensualities, their lusts, all that went on in the founders of some of the other so-called great faiths. I said to one of the leaders of this, and I thought I'd be carried out in a box after that. I was in Jerusalem, and I said to him, tell me, does it not bother you that you actually have this one you listen to and follow, whose whole life in private was so pathetic? He looked at me like that, and my videographer said, I think we better go on now and, really move on from here. For the Hebrews, the purity was seen in light. For the Greeks, it was seen in knowledge. For the Romans, it was seen in glory. Light, knowledge, glory. Light, knowledge, glory. The Apostle Paul, who was a Hebrew by birth, a citizen of Rome, and studied in a Greek city, wrote to the church at Corinth, God, who caused the light to shine out of darkness, has caused his light to shine in our hearts, to give to us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ Jesus our Lord. Where light, knowledge, and glory converged in a face, the pure Son of God, of whom it was said, no fault was found in him, who said of himself, which of you convinceth me of sin? And the last thought I leave with you is the resurrection from the dead. There was a cartoon I saw some time ago of a woman standing by a graveside, and it says, here lies Hiram B. Manley, who is known for coining the phrase, worst case scenario. Yeah, when you look at a grave, it is the worst case scenario. But when you look at an empty tomb, it is a glorious scenario that brings you to triumph and hope again. I want to leave you with a couple of illustrations, and then I will close with a piece of poetry. Let me pull this all together. Really, two things I want to say to you. Please follow me. 4 or 5 years ago, I'm in Ramallah in Israel. With the Archbishop of Canterbury, 5 or 6 of us have been taken to talk to the Palestinian and the Jewish leaders to come to the table for peace. You're talking mainly to the clergy, to the rabbis and all of them, and also to political leaders. On the last day, we were with Sheikh Dalal, who is one of the 4 founders of Hamas. And we're sitting in this smoke-filled room. He's given us a big meal, and all of his concerns and anger and is being vented. He'd been 18 years in prison. Some of his children had been killed. So after it's all over, the Archbishop looks at each one of us, 5 of us, and he says to me, why don't you all ask him one question? So I asked mine. I didn't like his answer, but I was not there to argue with him. I said, Sheikh, I'm not here to argue with you, and I'm your guest. I said, but can I say something to you? I said, very close to where you and I are sitting, 5,000 years ago, Abraham, whom you respect, took his son up a hill. Do you remember that story? He said, yeah. I said he wanted to find peace with God, and so he was willing to offer his only son. Let's not argue about which son it was, Sheikh. I said, let's agree it was his son. He said, okay. I said, as the axe is about to come down, Sheikh Dalal, God said, stop. He said, yes. I said, what did God say after that? He just went like this. I said, God said, stop. I myself will provide. He said, yes. I say, Sheikh, within a stone's throw from where you and I are sitting is another hill. 2,000 years ago, God kept that promise and took his own son up that hill. And this time the axe did not stop. There was pin drop silence in the room. I said, Sheikh Dalal, you and I may never see each other again, but I just say to you this. Until you and I receive the Son God has provided for us, we will be offering our own sons and daughters on the battlefields of this world for land and power and position and prestige. I said, that's all I want to say to you. He just looked at me. Nobody said a thing. The Archbishop said, well, let's head back. I said, brother, I've blown it. It was the end of the whole afternoon, and as we were about to get down the stairway, the Archbishop put his arm around me and he said, Ravi, that was of God. I said, I sure hope so. I said, I don't know. I said, all I can say to you is I never thought of that. We come down and I'm about to get into that well-protected SUV on the other side, and Sheikh Talal follows me. I thought, here it comes. He tapped me on the shoulder and I looked and he grabbed me by the shoulders. But my back, I have to be very careful. He pulled me towards him, went like this, kissed me on both sides of the face. And he said, Mr. Zacharias, you're a good man. You're a good man. I hope I see you again someday. And he just goes like this, walks away. I want you to think about who Jesus is and why he laid his life down for you. Because you see, until we receive the price that God has paid for you and for me, we will be paying the price with our own sons and our own daughters. When I was in Vietnam in my 20s, somebody handed me this, one of the U.S. Marines. He wrote this, Lord God, I have never spoken to you, but now I want to say, how do you do? You see, God, they told me you didn't exist. And like a fool, I believed all this. Last night from a shell hole, I saw your sky. I figured right then they had told me a lie. Had I taken time to see the things you've made, I'd have known they weren't calling a spade a spade. I wonder, God, if you'll take my hand. Somehow I feel that you'll understand. Funny, I had to come to this hellish place before I had time to see your face. I guess there isn't much more to say, but I'm sure glad, God, I met you today. I guess 0 hour will soon be here, but I'm not afraid since I know you're near. The signal, well, God, I'll have to go. I like you lots. I want you to know. Look now, this will be a horrible fight. Who knows, I may come to your house tonight. Though I wasn't friendly to you before, I wonder, God, if you'd wait at your door. Look, I'm crying. I'm shedding tears. I'll have to go now, God. Goodbye. Strange now since I met you. I'm not afraid to die. From the description of your heart to the triumph over the grave, Jesus is unique and offers you and me eternal life. That's why they say no one ever spoke like him. He is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes unto the Father except through him. If you don't know him, I ask you to go home and read the Gospel of John and ask him to reveal himself to you. If you do know him, treasure that great truth and become a reflector of that beautiful light. The world is a very dark place with arrogance and power and death all around us. And it is only Christ that can break the arrogant heart and give life even in these dark days. I'm seeing it happen wherever I go. May God bless you. Thank you.
You've been listening to apologist Ravi Zacharias in his message, The Distinctives of Christ. To order a copy of this message for yourself, or if you'd like to learn more about the ministry of RZIM and how you can partner with us, be sure to contact us. You can call us at 1-800-448-6766 or visit us online at rzim.org or rzim.ca for those listening in Canada. While you're on our website, we hope you'll check out our podcasts. Whether you want to learn how to be culturally informed or you just want to become better equipped to answer questions from family members or friends, these podcasts are designed to help you grow in your Christian faith. You can listen to episodes from these podcasts on our website at rzim.org.
Hello, this is Ravi Zacharias. Listen to these words from Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 and 7. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. Let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God which surpasses all understanding will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. My prayer for you is that you will truly find comfort in these words today.
We'd love to hear your comments about our radio programs, questions you may have, or prayer requests you'd like to share. You can email us at radio@rzim.org. When you contact us, be sure to let us know what radio station you're listening to. Let My People Think is a listener-supported radio ministry and is furnished by Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, Atlanta, Georgia.